Today's topic is the science of the sacred secretion, the Christ oil, and the art of the preservation. This is by author Victoria Lalo, and I'll put the link in the description underneath the video. The sacred secretion, also called Chrism or Christ oil, Endogenous DMT, and the honey and milk, is the title given to a natural spiritual mechanism of rejuvenation within the human body. During the monthly cycle, when the lunar energy empowers the starsign energy that clothed you at birth, the brain releases a brew of chemicals. The psychedelic concoction descends down the spine's 33rd vertebrae before ascending back up again into the place where God can be met face to face. The mind pineal. The secretion increases its vibrational potency throughout the process, changing in and out of form. Finally, after being preserved in a blissed body, the secretion is released, enhancing the senses of the individual and raising their conscious awareness. So this is considered sexual alchemy. There's 33 vertebrae in your spine. And that's symbolic of the 33 years of Jesus mentioned in the Bible. So the substance comes from your medulla, and it makes the trip down your spine to your sacrum, which is Christ coming down into human form. And if you don't squander that essence, that sexual essence, it ascends again and goes back up your spine, sort of like ascending back up to heaven, which is also similar to the story of Santa Claus and why he comes down the chimney and then exits it back out the chimney. This juice, or whatever the substance actually passes, is what's called the claustrum, which is where they get Santa Claus. So it goes down the chimney and back up the chimney. You know, in the brain, the cranium, there is the cerebellum, and the cerebellum, and in particular the claustrum, it's like the classroom. It's just sitting there in the middle of the head virtually. From the claustrum, there's a secretion of brain fluid, and this fluid is an oil. And in ancient times, this fluid was called, in Greek, the Christos. It's called the Christ. It's a fluidic oil that's made there in the cerebellum and pours down the spinal cord. It goes down the spinal cord and reaches the sacral plexus. So as this oil pours down the spinal cord, it reaches the sacral plexus, which is the 5 second bottommost fused vertebrae bones at the bottom of the spinal column, at the bottommost portion of the spinal column. It's called the coccyx. And just above that is the sacrum, the 5 fused bones. So the sacral plexus is connected to the sacrum, and the fluid which comes from the cerebellum pours down the spinal cord and comes to the bottommost part of the spinal cord there. Now that cloud stream is otherwise known as the holy claustrum, simply because this beautiful oil that Christos has produced and secreted, you see, the word secret comes from secretion, because the secretion is a secret, and the sacrum is the sacred part of the secret of the secretion that pours down the spinal cord and reaches the sacrum. And in this way, the body has been designed, and the spinal cord is basically just an extension of the brain, as it also does thinking, you see. And the holy claustrum, and otherwise known as the Santa Claus, you see this fluid that goes down the sacred plexus, is a sacred fluid. And this is where the story of Santa Claus bringing presents down the chimney comes from. It's a story of physiology in the Bible, and a beautiful manual of psychological regeneration and what happens with this fluid. So every month when the moon is in the sign where your sun was when you were born, for example, I was born in the sign of Virgo, that's when the germ or the seed planted in that solar plexus, which is just above the sacred sacral plexus. That gem there, that oil, the Christ, which is born in Bethlehem, because the solar plexus is known as Bethlehem, where the seed or where the Christ is born. That seed needs that, and that oil needs to return. Once it came into the midbrain, you see that oil ascends the spinal cord. The vibration of the oil of Christ increases. And you see, first of all, the oil is differentiated in the pineal gland and the pituitary gland before it is sent down the spinal cord. And the pineal gland is the electric portion, and the pituitary gland is the magnetic portion. So the oil is differentiated as it's brought down the spinal cord via the Pingala and the Ida nerves. These are what is otherwise known as the Kundalini and the Kundabathas. So it arrives in a sacral plexus and awaits for the germination of the seed once a month, which of course is going to happen 12 times a year. And when we're able to transmute that seed and cause it to rise, it rises up the spinal cord, eventually reaches the medulla oblongata. So eventually this reaches the mid part of the brain, and it crosses the vagus nerve, otherwise known as the nomadic gastric nerve. It's a nerve which descends from the brain area from the pineal and pituitary gland, respectively, and it feeds the lungs and the stomach. It's a network of nerves, and this network of nerves is called the tree of life. And you see, the ancients knew this. They knew the seed would be born in Bethlehem once a month. It's the Christ, and that is one that's the time that we need to abstain from sex during that period. So the oil and seed would be saved, and it would rise, and it would burst through the heart chakra, through the throat chakra, and eventually the oil would arrive with its higher vibration, because you see at the bottom the oil has a very low vibration rate, whereas with proper practices in meditation, good breathing, good eating, and most of all good peaceful behavior, you're able to raise that Christ oil so that it crosses that vagus nerve at the top of the spinal column, the 33rd vertebrae of the spinal column. You see, because the Christ is crucified at 33 years of age. So when the oil arrives at the very top, there awaiting is the optic thalamus, an egg-shaped organ in the middle of the head. And when it crosses the pneumonic gastric nerve, or the vagus nerve, this is called the crucifixion. The oil is not killed and destroyed, but it is magnified 1,000-fold. And then the oil then touches the optic thalamus, and for 2.5 days remains in a condition that is considered to be dead. Okay, and then it reaches the pineal gland, and 2.5 days, and illuminates the optic thalamus and the pineal gland, as the optic thalamus, also known as the light of the world by the Egyptians and the Greeks, because they knew their physiology and anatomy, of course, and they knew that this precious oil, which descended from the colostrum, from the cerebellum, and was differentiated in the pineal and pituitary glands. So as this descended the spinal cord, they knew that it would ascend eventually, and that the enlightened portion of mankind were able to cause this Christ oil to ascend, so that it would ascend to the optic thalamus. And of course, one would be enlightened. What in turn happens is that millions of brain cells that were dormant are now awakened, and you see there are practices and there are things that are very, very detrimental about this oil, or that are detrimental to this oil. For instance, overheating, overreacting, alcohol, sex practice in the wrong way. These all destroy the seed and the oil. And this is what is known from eating of the tree of life. Because you see, the ancients knew that once the oil is depleted because of riotous living and the fleshly orgasm, dies a death as a result from that, from using up all the oil and that's descended from the cerebellum is otherwise, it's known as the manna from heaven. So you say, because heaven means heaved up, and the head, the cranium, the dome, which sits on top of the torso, that was known as the heavens. You see, in the heart area, and the heart chakra was known as the midgard or the middle garden, and the generative area was the genitalia area was known as the Sodom and Gomorrah, that area of desire and animal desire, you see. And otherwise known, like, to Egypt as hell, end of the world, which is that real physical aspect of that base chakra, that red color, and that very low level survival and physical aspects of us. So whereas the Garden of Eden and the land flowing with milk and honey, that's upstairs. In fact, that's the pineal gland that produces the honey and the secretion known as honey, which has DMT in it. And the pituitary body secretes the milk, that is the milk and honey. And the land flowing with the milk and honey, of course, is upstairs. This is a sacred secret simply because the secretion which comes from the sacral plexus is one of the most important things that we need to know about physiological regeneration. You see, by saving the seed, one can actually live longer, and in fact, the ancients used to live for thousands of years. By protecting and keeping this secret and guarding it, the Egyptians built ascension chambers, pyramids, for this very purpose. They taught the science of respecting and keeping and guarding and looking after this beautiful oil. And if you know the Gospels well, you know all the scriptures that are referring to it. You see, I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness. The light of the world is the optic thalamus. So keep your eye simple, for as your eye is dark, your whole body will be up dark. The eye has always been known as the third eye, in fact, the spiritual eye. Now, as for all the deniers, you see, most churchgoers will be denying this because in their mind, Jesus Christ is a historical person which must return physically in order to save them, because they cannot save themselves. They need a victorious third-party savior, whereas the opposite is true, and this is what the so-called Apostle Paul was talking about when he referred to the sacred secret of Jesus within the Christ that dwelleth within. For you see, the kingdom of God is within, it's not without. And in fact, the words of Jesus are pretty clear when it says, do not be looking out there for the kingdom, for it will come in striking observableness. Don't look here and don't look there, because there will be deceivers saying, oh, there he is, and Christ is in the desert. And well, because this process is within, and unless one is able to raise that energy and get out of the bottom chakras, if you see, the bottom chakras deal with sexuality, strife, envy, power, greed, wealth, all those things. And if one is constantly seeking those things and constantly eating of the fruit of the tree of life, you see, those beautiful nerves, the vagus nerve system, they're responsible for the oil backup, those beautiful spiritual presence. And we're the ones that are responsible for channeling that oil, that Christ seed within, so that it eventually is crucified in the middle of the head, in that cerebellum. That's why it's hollowed out in the midbrain, and the lymphatic system at the top of the spinal cord is the Holy of Holies, and that's the cerebellum, which sits in the back of the brain. This is otherwise known as the small brain, and the cerebellum is associated with the top of the head, like Aries, and the cerebellum is associated with Taurus. And the left brain, the male left brain, the right brain is the feminine. And you see, it is connected to the cerebellum. And Aries, the God brain, you see, we have God man is the cerebellum. The Adam man is the cerebellum. Now, you won't get any of this in church. This is esoteric truth that's been kept secret and practiced by Masons, the Rosicrucians. All the secret esoteric societies have used this secret to increase their intellect and their intellectual capability, as well as their spiritual gifts, such as different psychic abilities. This is all activated with this oil and this very process. And it's the process that's being described in Christianity, but also in Islam and also in Buddhism and all the religions that build this symbolism around this concept comes from our ancient religions that came out of Egypt and Atlantis. And even in Egypt now, we can read the Temple of Man. You see these different hieroglyphs and symbols that are all highlighting this exact same truth that we see here that I'm trying to discuss. This discussion here should be in the heart of every male and female, as we both have the capability of raising this oil. For man, an ejaculation would cast this oil off. So the process has to be to keep from releasing that in that process. So it applies for both men and women. When you reach that point of climax, you want to exercise control. So this doesn't mean that you have to stop having sex. You can still have as much sex as you want. You just don't want to reach the full climax and orgasm to where your testosterone for men, your levels drop and you want to stop. That's going too far. You have to retain that seed, so just stop before you reach that point. That way the energy and oil doesn't get exhausted in the process. And this will build an essence about you. And that essence is the spiritual Christ-like energy. It's the oil working within you. So you'll be more creative. You'll have more energy. And you'll want to apply yourself more when you're in this practice. So the meditation, filing intent with oneself to raise the oil is needed. You need to understand the process and then work this process with intent and meditation to raise that oil, to have control over your orgasm, to not release. These things have to be practiced. And you have one time a month, and it's pretty simple. Whatever month you were, whatever cycle you were born in, so whatever astrological sign. So like I was saying, I'm in August, so mine would be Virgo. And this month, coming on the 16th, the moon will enter my sun sign, which is Virgo. And every month, every sign will be entered by the moon. So you need to figure out your astrological sign, and then the moon, when does the moon pass through that sign? So for me, it was Virgo. I can look at the charts and just see, well, that's going to be on the 16th. So on the 16th, I need to refrain from having any orgasm. So I'm already in that practice to retain as much as I can. But after a certain period, it's okay to release and have an orgasm. And that changes with the age. So the older you get, the less there's going to be. The younger you are, the more vitality you have. So you have once every 4 days, I believe it is, for up to age 25. And then after that, you start taming it down to once a week, once every 2 weeks. And by the time you hit 40 and 50, you should be about once a month that you're actually having an orgasm. And the rest of the time, you're retaining that essence. And you're using that essence. And what's happening, it's very subtle, but the essence is rising back up. And it's illuminating that pineal gland as we described here. And that's unlocking dormant brain cells. And these dormant brain cells are causing your intellect to develop, and you're becoming more intellectual. You're wanting to study more and becoming more spiritual. And that's a natural thing that you can observe to help reassure yourself that the process is working. Because you'll feel the essence, you'll feel the power of your psychic abilities growing, and you'll just feel more spiritually connected to the field of energy that you're aligning with, which is going to be very, very important for the coming years. As we all try to move towards this fourth density transition, we need the Christos energy that's within us to come out. So this material and this book is a very excellent book. I'm just kind of summarizing and going off my notes here to recap this edition for you. And if you want to learn more about this, I suggest picking up a copy. They're easy to locate and definitely worth the time reading this. So I find this information absolutely critical for the philosophical movement's understanding. This applies a scientific approach as well as a spiritual approach in understanding what's transpiring in our bodies, what our brain's purpose is. You know, this spot, this cherubim, is the cerebellum. It's this area of the brain that is being described as the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy of the Holies and the mercy seat and all that. This is all within us. That temple that the Jews had built in the first temple and the second temple are just an physical description of this temple that's within inside us, that's within inside our brains, each and every one of us. And like I said, this information has been kept secret from the masses. And this is a process of internal worship where we cast out everything that's external. So any external God cannot exist in this realm of only the one God. And when I say that, I mean, Hear, O Israel, your God is one God. As the Bible has said, there's only one God. There's no other gods. So there's the one God that is playing all the roles, like the roles that I'm playing, that you're playing. It's the same being, the same energy, and we come from that same prime creator. And the process is to understand who we are. And of course, this temple that we call our bodies has a description. And when we go in deeper into this description, we can see a fine application of all the points mentioned in the New Testament and Old Testament. Being read as an internal process is completely different than reading it as an external process. And a lot of the individuals that are still in these organizations and churches and groups are still learning this. So we have to have patience with them. Let them go through their external processes, for all paths lead to the one way. So eventually all will come to that same understanding and have respect for each and every one, even their enemies, knowing that they are the Father too. So in that message, let's take away from this, there's a process and a way to raise your energy, raise your kundalini, raise that sacred oil. And it has to do with your sexual energy, those lower chakras. That's where we're going to start. So starting to control your physical animalistic instincts is the beginning of the battle with the flesh that the spirit must undergo. Good luck in your journeys. Love and light.